that you may have. So you can type your questions in the chat box, and I'll make sure those get asked at the end. And then for disclosure purposes, we're going to be recording this presentation and also posting it on YouTube for those who were unable to make it today. One other thing before we get started, last week we announced 4 new hires here at Will, including Shannon Whitworth, who's going to be joining our team as part of the Bradley Fellows Program and providing commentary. He's on the call today, so I thought I'd just give him a quick opportunity to introduce himself to the group, and we'll get started shortly after that.
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Shannon Whitworth. I am the director of the Free Enterprise Academy at Milwaukee Lutheran High School. It's a choice school where we are taking a majority of inner city economically disadvantaged Black kids, and with my program we're trying to teach them not only basic financial skills but also the value of free enterprise in order to build wealth and build legacies in inner city communities. So I'm really excited to join Will in this effort, especially with regard to school choice, and I look forward to the upcoming presentation.
Thanks, Shannon. With that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Will Flanders, who's the research director here at Will, and he's authored a number of reports that highlight the benefits of school choice in Wisconsin. So take it away, Will.
All right, thanks, Kyle and Shannon, and thank you all for joining us here today. As I'm sure most folks here are familiar, this is a National School Choice Week throughout the country. We're celebrating the options that families are being provided more and more, and Wisconsin is no exception. We have a wide variety of school choice programs. Some of them, often come to top of mind when we use the phrase school choice. Other ones might be a little less familiar to folks, and we're going to try to go through all of those. And yeah, look forward to any questions you have. We're going to try to keep this at a sort of a basic level to begin with, but happy to get more in depth as well for folks that have those sorts of questions as well. So I just wanted to begin with an overview of the school choice options that we have in the state. I think when we use the phrase school choice here in Wisconsin, most people tend to think of our private school choice programs. These are very important and large programs. So we have the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program, the Racine Parental Choice Program, our statewide Parental Choice Program, as well as the Special Needs Scholarship Program. We also have charter schools in the state, and don't worry about these terms here if you're unfamiliar. We'll go through them subsequently in the presentation here. But we have 3 different types of charter schools: independent charters, instrumentalities, and non-instrumentalities as well. We also have the open enrollment program, and I think this is one of the programs that oftentimes people may not think of as a school choice program, but it definitely is. This is an option for parents that are unsatisfied with their homeschool district to send their kids to an alternative option. We'll just put out a policy report with my colleague Jessica Holmberg as the lead author that sort of goes through the history of the program and ways that it can be improved. So I definitely invite folks to take a look at that as well. For some more information on that program. And we also have the tuition tax credit program here in the state of Wisconsin. That lets folks deduct their tuition that they pay to private schools from their state income tax. And to the extent that that also helps folks to take advantage of school choice, we know that private schools, for those that may not qualify for our traditional choice programs, can be very expensive. For many middle class families, they may be out of reach. And I think it's important that we include that in our list of school choice programs in the state as well. Now we're going to go through each of these programs in a little bit more detail. The first here is the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program. We generally call that the nation's oldest parental choice program. I did put an asterisk here saying that Vermont may dispute this. The only other program that predates Wisconsin's choice program is a tuition program that they have in Vermont since the 1800s for areas that were pretty rural and didn't necessarily have traditional public schools. They did actually let students attend private schools on something like a voucher, even back in the 1800s. So that's the caveat there. But we still like to call ourselves the nation's oldest, and I think by most metrics we still qualify. We're a bigger state than Vermont, so we can take precedence. So this program began in 1990, and what's important to note with our Milwaukee Parental Choice program is that it was a bipartisan coalition. So I put a picture here of a couple of the integral folks involved in the process. There was Dr. Howard Fuller, who was the superintendent of MPS. He saw the failure of the traditional school system to educate kids, particularly minority students, and was willing to work across the aisle with Republican and folks to make a change. The program was implemented under Governor Tommy Thompson. On the conservative side, I think folks, we like the narrative of free markets. We like the narrative of markets actually, raising all ships and bringing more people into the fold. The initial idea of school choice was formulated by the well-known libertarian economist Milton Friedman. So we have support from that side on the notion of building free markets and helping improve the marketplace by bringing more options into the fold. And then we have some folks from the other side that were concerned about primarily about increasing educational options in the inner city. Those two sides came together, and that bipartisan coalition was pretty long lasting in the early days of school choice, though it's frayed quite substantially, unfortunately, in the last few years. This program serves now more than 28,000 students, and the income limit is up to 300% of the federal poverty line. So a family of four, that's an income of $78,000 or so per year that allows families to participate at or below that threshold. And we have 131 schools participating. That number keeps growing year after year. The next program is the Racine Parental Choice Program. This is one of our newer school choice programs. It serves students in the Racine Unified School District who are looking for alternative options. More than 3,700 students currently participate in the program, and the income limit matches that of the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program at 300% of the federal poverty limit. As of the most recent data available, we have 25 schools participating in that program. Next, we have the Wisconsin Parental Choice Program. Among our programs that are open to non-special needs students, this is our newest program, and it's among the newest programs in the country. Started in 2013, and it covers the entire state outside of Milwaukee and Racine. There was a long-term push to expand school choice options outside of Milwaukee to make sure that families that may be struggling just as much. We know that many of our rural areas in the state, when you look at their proficiency rates and you look at their academic outcomes, they don't actually look that much different than MPS. And unfortunately for those families, for a long time, there weren't any of these alternative options. But the Wisconsin Parental Choice Program has made that available. Currently, it's serving more than 11,700 students. You can see on the right side of the screen here the growth in the program from under 1,000 students in 2013 when it started to over 11,000, approaching 12,000 today. So there's been substantial year-over-year growth in the program. Income limits are 220% of the federal poverty limit. So it's important to note here, this is a key difference from our other choice programs that we've mentioned. Those programs have an income limit of 300% of the federal poverty limit. This program has a 220% of the poverty limit as the income threshold, and that's an income of 58,000 or so for a family of four, so substantially lower. The number of schools participating is 280 schools, and you might note that there's a lower number of kids participating, but more schools. That's largely because that we have enrollment thresholds on this program. So only a certain percentage of students in a school district are eligible to enroll in the Wisconsin Parental Choice Program every year. That percentage is increasing over time, so the percentage of kids in a district that can enroll is going up, but it does serve to limit the potential for schools to open primarily to serve kids that would need a voucher to attend school. The last program of our traditional private school choice programs that we'll discuss here is the Special Needs Scholarship Program. This program started in 2016. Students statewide are eligible to participate, and students that have an IEP in the public schools are eligible for the SNSP. This program serves more than 1,400 students. It's growing as well. There are, some challenges that have had to be overcome. We can discuss those, potentially later on. But I think we've created a program at this point that is very effective at helping to meet the needs of special needs students that aren't getting those needs served in their traditional public school setting. Now we'll discuss the three types of charter schools, like I mentioned on the initial slide. The first is our independent charter schools. And these are the only charter schools in the state that we classify as not being under the jurisdiction, under the purview of a school district. So we in state law have a number of different charter school authorizers. These include the city of Milwaukee, the UW system, UW Stout, as well as UW Milwaukee, and the Office of Educational Opportunity, which is the newest charter school authorizer in state law. They're authorized to open schools in Madison and Milwaukee. So far, I believe they've only opened schools, a couple schools in Madison, but that's an exciting opportunity to see what can happen with that in subsequent years. About 8,900 students throughout the state attend these independent charter schools. They're primarily located in Milwaukee, though, as I said, there are a couple that are now in Racine. The more complex differentiation here, I think, is on the non-instrumentality versus the instrumentality charters. Both of these types of charters are under the jurisdiction, under the purview of the traditional public school system. The non-instrumentality charters, though, have a great deal more independence. So these schools don't necessarily have unionized teachers. They have a good deal of freedom in terms of what curriculum they create. They're charter schools in the sense that people often think of charters as sort of trying different pathways to educate kids. On the other hand, we have instrumentality charter schools. And the reason we use this terminology is because these charters are essentially instruments of the district. In previous years, we've used the term that these are sort of charters in name only. They have unionized teachers. They have generally, they may have the same curriculum as traditional public schools, so there's not as much differentiation there as there are in our other types of charters that we've mentioned previously. Why do these charter schools exist? Well, in some sense, in Milwaukee, they may just be charters in name only. In other instances, there may be some freedom afforded. But what caused a lot of growth was that during the Obama administration, there were tax credits available for charter schools, and a number of traditional public schools were converted over to charters just so they could have access to that money. So good on the Obama administration for trying to expand chartering, but it had these unintended consequences to some extent. Between the non-instrumentality and instrumentality charters, we have more than 35,000 students in these district-run charters throughout the state. Finally, we'll mention open enrollment here. The program began in 1998. And again, a lot of people don't think of this as a school choice program. I will say when I've gone to some, academic conferences over the years, and I've heard that, when you go to a presentation on school choice, often what they're really talking about is open enrollment. So in other parts of the country, this is what people conceive of as a school choice program. It is the largest school choice program in the state, serving more than 62,000 students. Technically, all districts throughout the state participate, but they have the ability to limit the number of seats that they have, and we'll discuss some new legislation here at the end that potentially could address some of that. And there are districts that limit their available seats to 0, rightly or wrongly. If they actually have no seats available, that's obviously a reasonable thing to do. One little note on the tuition tax credit here. These are the amounts that the tuition tax credit goes up to. It's $4,000 for a student in grades K through 8 and up to $10,000 in grades 9 through 12. I think it's important to note here that there are pretty substantial funding disparities between our school sectors, and this tends to create inequities that can be a challenge for schools to overcome. So what you see on this slide is the most recent data from DPI for state and local revenue. It's important to note that we're not including federal revenue here. In some districts, federal revenue can substantially increase these gaps. We know that Will's been involved in a lot of issues where choice schools aren't getting access to federal money as they should. So those gaps can even be larger than what's shown here. But this is just looking at state and local funds. And what we see here is that the average public school in the state of Wisconsin gets about $10,600 per student. But across all of our choice programs, our traditional school choice and parental choice in private schools, our independent charters, as well as our district charters, there's substantially less funding. The voucher amount varies between high school and grade in K through 8 level, but on average, it's about $8,500 per student. So there's about a $2,000 gap between the choice programs in the state and the average traditional public school. Our independent charters are closer to the $9,000 range, but again, still a big gap to traditional public schools. District charters are a little more challenging because they theoretically make individual contracts with the district. But in most cases, what we see is that the districts have matched the independent charter amount. So those tend to be on par, though there are a few charter schools that have managed to negotiate a slightly higher rate from their school district. So given what we've seen on the previous slides, you might think that, well, these choice schools must be struggling to perform because they're funded significantly less, but that's not what we see. Um, Will has done a report every year called Apples to Apples, where we try to put schools on a level playing field. So what we do is we account for those factors that traditionally make education more difficult. So we know that economic status, for instance, is a big barrier for student achievement. And what we want to do is, level those things out and look with a statistical analysis at how are these schools performing given their student population relative to public schools. And what we've seen year after year, these are from our most recent report in 2019, is that our school choice programs outperform traditional public schools. The figure on the left is from our Milwaukee data. And what you can see there is that in the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program, proficiency on the forward exam is higher in both English language arts and mathematics. Our non-instrumentality charters tend to be a big star. The performance differences are kind of off the charts there. We see higher proficiency in both ELA and English language arts and mathematics. Our independent charter schools, we've traditionally have seen higher performance in both ELA and math. On our most recent report that I've reproduced here, we saw just a higher performance level in math, but that's a substantially higher proficiency level, 8% higher. That's really substantial. And our instrumentality charters tended to follow a similar pattern. Not a great deal of proficiency difference, though we did find some difference in mathematics in our most recent edition. Looking at the statewide data on the right, I think it's important to note that, again, you saw that our Wisconsin Parental Choice Program is new. It's been very small over the past couple of years. In our first couple of years, we weren't finding much of a proficiency difference. We were finding that the choice schools were performing about on par with our public schools. But in our most recent analysis in 2019, we did find a proficiency difference in math for our statewide parental choice program. Students participating in the statewide parental choice program were about 3% higher proficient in mathematics relative to students in traditional public schools. Our instrumentality charters actually had a lower level of performance. This kind of gets to the notion that these are sort of charters in name only, and there's not that much differentiation between public schools. And at least in this report, we found a statistically significant lower level of performance in math in those instrumentalities. So given that academic performance is better and they're funded at a lower level, we can make the claim that we're getting a better bang for our buck by spending money on private schools and on charter schools. So I did a study in 2016. It was actually the first report that I worked on at Will, and you can kind of see the difference in our graphical quality between the years here. This is a chart reproduced from that first study that I did, which isn't quite so high quality. But what we showed there is that independent charter schools and non-instrumentalities, as well as instrumentalities to a lesser extent, get more points on what was then the Badger exam, now is the forward exam, than traditional public schools. An additional $1,000 of spending gains more points in these school sectors than it does in MPS. There's a study from Corey DeAngelis, who many of you may be familiar with at the Racine Foundation. He worked with School Choice Wisconsin in early 2020 to do a similar study that looked both at charters and at the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program. And he found that private schools are about 30% more efficient with taxpayer money than traditional public schools. So not only are these schools achieving a better outcome for students, they're doing it at a lower cost. And from the perspective of taxpayers, that means that this arguably is a better investment of taxpayer money than just throwing more money at the traditional school system, which doesn't seem to be making many performance gains. All of these things that we've discussed on the previous slides actually lead to better life outcomes for students. And I think, when you go into these schools, when you speak with the teachers and the principals and the students that are involved in these schools, what you see is that character is a huge focus. We heard from Shannon Whitworth, and that is a huge focus at his school, and that's pretty typical across the school choice sector. And I think that, more than anything else, may contribute to some of the better life outcomes that we see here. We know from studies from the School Choice Demonstration Project, which was state mandated project that was conducted by the University of Arkansas in the mid 2000s, that students that participate in choice have a higher rate of high school graduation than a cohort of students that is similar but in traditional public schools. They also have a higher rate of getting into college. This was a more recent addition. Dr. Wolf from University of Arkansas has been following these students over the years since they left high school, and now they can say definitively that the students that attended the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program were more likely to get into college. There's also lower involvement in criminal activity. It's a study from University of Arkansas folks as well, and also a lower level of involvement in paternity suits, which is a different sort of angle at looking at potential character benefits. What we see on the right-hand side here is a study that I worked on with Corey DeAngelis a couple of years ago. And we said, given all these better life outcomes, this has to be a quantifiable sort of economic benefit to the state of Wisconsin. And so we looked at the cohorts of students that would graduate over the next few years and sort of added up the benefits of getting out of high school, the greater likelihood of getting a job, the lower likelihood of becoming involved in criminal activity. And we found about a $473 million benefit to the state, or excuse me, $1 billion benefit to the state of Wisconsin over the next 15 to 20 years. So that's a substantial benefit that people should take into account when they're calculating the quote unquote costs of school choice. Just wanted to throw in something here about some of the recent data that we gathered last year. We know that schools throughout the state saw a declining enrollment due to the pandemic. A lot of parents were dissatisfied with the ways that their traditional schools were conducting virtual education. So across the state, regardless of the sort of mechanisms of learning that were utilized, we saw about a 790% increase in enrollment decline. So enrollment went down 790% more than in other years. But districts that went fully virtual saw an even bigger decline. Fully virtual districts saw a further 3% decline in enrollment. That may not sound huge, but when you consider that on the average year enrollment declines by 0.3%, this is a substantial increase in the rate at which people are choosing other options. And districts that had experience with virtual education, so districts that had virtual charters, those saw an increase. So what we saw is that parents were moving out of districts that had gone fully virtual to virtual charters, as well as to districts that were offering in-person instruction. Another encouraging sign is that our private school choice programs continue to grow during the pandemic. Our WPCP, as you could see from the earlier chart perhaps, continued its steady growth, growing by about 2,700 students during this last year. And so what we can say from that is that parents like the options that were being offered during the pandemic in private schools. Private schools were more likely to try to stay open, more likely to be creative in their means of offering instruction, and that's showing up in our enrollment figures throughout the pandemic. So the last major thing I'll discuss here is, as we look forward, we know these programs are effective. We know they're doing a good job for families, and families want to have more access to them. So what can we do to make things even better? And I think that the first thing we want to discuss here is, working towards funding every student. So you saw on that slide earlier that the amount of funding per student varies substantially between our choice programs and our traditional public schools. In all cases, it's less. And we know they're doing more with less, given the subsequent data. But it's not fair that a student in a particular zip code is worth less than a student in another. And it's not fair that a student who chooses to go to a choice school is worth less in the eyes of the state and local government than a student who attends public schools. So we think moving in the direction of funding every student, making changes to our funding formula that over the long term to make that possible is one of the biggest things that we could do to improve school choice. Backpack funding, money following the kids. Another thing here is lifting the income limits on the Wisconsin Parental Choice Program. A student who lives outside of Milwaukee, maybe in West Milwaukee or West Dallas, at a certain family income between $58,000 and $78,000 a year, can't take advantage of the school choice programs that someone just a couple miles away in Milwaukee can, and that's fundamentally unfair. At minimum, we should work on matching the income caps on the WPCP to those of our other MPCP and RPCP programs. In the long term, eliminating income caps would probably be the ideal. When you look back again to the sort of initial ideas for school choice from folks like Milton Friedman, the idea is that everyone should have access to these programs, and that can help increase diversity in schools, make sure folks are exposed to people from other backgrounds, generally beneficial across the board. Last thing we'll mention here is lifting barriers on open enrollment. Currently, there's a process that that schools have to, that families have to go through in order to open enroll through an alternative process, and that requires the consent of the home district in order for that open enrollment to occur. So the district that's effectively going to lose some revenue gets to decide whether or not the student can leave. Currently, Senator Koyenga has a bill that would work to change that, at least in the short term. And we think moving towards a more open enrollment system in that sense and in other senses could potentially be beneficial and bring that program to its full realization. So with that, we'll turn it over to Kyle for any questions that have come in the chat. And if you do have any questions, feel free to add them right now. And yeah, Kyle, back to you.
Problem with the mute again. I appreciate it, Will. And if you have any other follow-up questions after this, please feel free to email myself or Will. Our email addresses are right there on the screen. So to kick off the questions, I have one from Shannon. What are you finding are the major barriers to having parents avail themselves of school choice, especially in the inner cities?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we've seen over time that, yes, the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program has grown, but it's still only used by 28,000 students. We still have 76,000 students enrolled in the traditional public school system. I think there's always an information barrier, but I think, one of the bigger barriers is how difficult it can be for parents to navigate the process of enrolling. So we mentioned the income caps. In order to, prove that you're low enough income, there's a whole bunch of hoops that have to be jumped through for parents to enroll. For some folks, folks with a limited income and a limited amount of free time, as they may have to work, multiple jobs, it can be very difficult to get those pieces of information together to enroll initially. So I think that easing the process of enrollment to the extent possible, I think could be beneficial. But I also think that there's always a lack of knowledge, and getting the news out about the program and how effective it's been. When you listen to the traditional media, you'll hear the negative stories if you hear anything at all. But getting the positive message out there about how effective this can be is always a goal that we can work more to achieve.
Great. I have one from Tammy. Have you heard of or used the term magnet to refer to any of the charter schools? If yes, can you explain?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question as well. So I think that we were discussing the instrumentality charters and calling them charters in name only. I think there's been some proposals in the past. I think maybe Senator Strobel, I'm not 100% sure on that, to reclassify those as magnet schools. I think that would be potentially an effective differentiation. We know that in our traditional studies, the instrumentalities kind of bring down the performance advantage of traditional charters. And I think differentiating them in that way could be beneficial and something that definitely should be looked at.
All right, we got one from Benjamin here. How do charter schools with less funding achieve better academic results? Are the teachers simply better? And at what point does funding cease to correlate with results?
Great question. So I think that this is one of the things that I always struggle with as someone who does a lot of data analysis. But again, I think when we go into these schools, so for a charter school example, I'll use Dr. Howard Fuller School. In that school, there's a tremendous motivation to get kids into college. That is the sort of overarching goal that we see in that school. And I think in a lot of charter schools, as well as our choice programs, there's an emphasis on accountability. There's an emphasis on discipline that may not exist in the traditional system. And I think that while it's challenging to say this one particular thing is the source of the performance advantage, I think that all of those factors together and sort of allowing creativity on the part of educators. When you look at the foundations of charter schools in Minneapolis, the original idea was that it would give teachers independence to sort of explore their creativity. And I think that to the extent charter schools are able to meet that model, it's not one silver bullet. It's a lot of different factors that come into play there. So sorry, I don't have a more definitive answer on that, but I think it's one of those you have to see it to believe it sort of a situations there. In terms of when does funding become less effective? I think that in many cases we've crossed that threshold. When we've done some analyses across the state of the performance per tax dollar, even just in our public school sector, it's a negative relationship. Where we spend more money in Wisconsin, we actually tend to see lower levels of achievement. So while we wouldn't want to say, there's obviously some point where it's where it does matter. We couldn't fund schools with $0 per student, but we seem to be well beyond that threshold of where additional dollars matter. And when we talk about funding every kid and equaling things out, that's a message of equality. That's a message of increasing equity. Not necessarily saying we need to spend substantially more across the board, just that we should be doling out what we do spend in a more equitable fashion.
Great. We have one here from Sharon. When school choice started, we were promised that vouchers would help private schools better pay their staff, but we haven't seen these promised salary gains. Why is that? And how can we get better salaries for teachers if we are pushing that voucher schools are 30% more efficient? This rates to the bottom line. Efficiency doesn't help with recruiting staff. What's the answer to this dilemma?
So this is a difficult point to reconcile, right? I think we're guilty of it. I'm guilty of it in sort of talking out of both sides of my mouth about efficiency, as well as the performance advantage. And I think that the solution, I think, lies in the realm of moving towards equity, moving towards that goal of funding every kid equally. That's $2,000 more theoretically per student in a voucher school that definitely could be utilized to help recruit teachers, to help retain teachers. We know the teacher pipeline is an issue. We know that teacher retention and teacher burnout is a huge issue. Creating equity where teachers students are funded to the same level, I think could go a long way in helping to reconcile some of those differences. And by the way, when we talk about performance advantages, theoretically, we would hope that equalizing funding would only help to expand those performance advantages, and that schools would be able to use their funds equally more effectively if they had a little bit more to work with.
All right. And last question I have here is from CJ. If you were king for a day, what changes would you make to Wisconsin K-12 and school choice?
Great question. So I think that I think the biggest thing that the pipe dream sort of question there. I think we'd like to move towards an education savings account program. So we didn't discuss ESAs in this presentation. I'm sure a lot of folks on the call are familiar, but for those that aren't, education savings account, rather than being a voucher that's transferred from the state to the school, parents receive the funds into an account that they can use for educational expenses. And this has the advantage that parents are more able to tailor their education for their child, maybe away from a single source. So you can, take classes at a school. You can use some of that funding to hire a tutor. You can use some of that funding for, additional, reading resources, or a wide variety of different things. And I think in the ultimate, vision, we'd like to see school funded through an ESA, take it out of the government's hands effectively and put it fully into the hands of parents. That's a difficult proposal to get traction on, especially given that we already have implemented very effective school choice programs in the state. But I think in the long term, that's the direction we'd love to move.
And actually, we got one additional question came in. What can individuals do to advance the legislative agenda to continue expanding school choice in Wisconsin?
Great question. So I think that this is an issue that a lot of folks are supportive of, but it's not always an issue that gets the biggest voice. It's not always an issue that's at the forefront. Last School Choice Week, there was a great event organized by AFC and School Choice Wisconsin and Hispanics for School Choice in the Capitol, where there was a picture I had earlier of the vice president, giving a speech here, showcasing the great success of school choice and bringing the kids to the Capitol to show the state legislature that these kids matter, these kids exist, and these kids want to protect their programs. Obviously, we can't, bring the vice president in. Maybe at this point, we might not want to. I don't think she's a school choice supporter, but to the extent we can put the kids and the principals and the teachers in front of people and make people aware of the extent to which this program has had a meaningful impact on their lives, that does more than any of the data that I can bring to the table. And I think that's the way to advance the agenda.
Great. Thanks, Will. And just as a follow-up, if you have any further questions, please feel free to email either one of us. And we'll be sure to send a video of the presentation around for those who want to share it And yeah, thanks again for joining us today. I hope you guys all enjoy the rest of your week.